Chapter 3. The House of Broken Mirrors. The corridor beyond the carved door stretched impossibly long, its walls lined with crystalline panels that reflected his image back at him in distorted fragments. Not mirrors, something more invasive. Each panel captured a different angle, a different moment, as if trying to reconstruct him from pieces that no longer fit together. The robed figures guided him forward, with hands that felt neither warm nor cold, their touch somehow neutral, clinical. He stumbled once, legs uncertain after however long he'd spent, chained in that marble chamber. The figures steadied him without comment, their grip adjusting to support his weight without acknowledgement of weakness. No faces were visible beneath their hoods, or perhaps there were, and he simply couldn't focus on them. Every time he tried to look directly at one of his escorts, his gaze slid away like water off glass. The hallway ended at another door, this one unadorned save for a single symbol etched into dark wood. A circle bisected by 7 lines, each pointing toward the center, but stopping just short of touching. The figures released him, stepping back in perfect synchronization. The door opened inward without sound, revealing a chamber that made his empty chest constrict with something approximating anxiety. The room was circular, perhaps 50 feet across, its domed ceiling rising 3 stories above. Alcoves lined the walls at multiple levels, each one occupied by a robed figure holding what looked like crystalline tablets that pulsed with soft light. Not an office, not a study, an observation chamber. He stood at the center of a specimen jar, and every eye in the room watched him with the detached interest of scientists examining something that shouldn't exist. Marcus turned slowly, taking in the ascending rows of observers. 30, 40. More figures filled alcoves he couldn't quite see into, their tablets casting dancing lights across walls of polished stone. The floor beneath his feet bore intricate patterns, circles within circles, symbols he couldn't read. Geometric precision that suggested measurement rather than decoration. Welcome to House Astiphir, Marcus Vale. The voice came from directly ahead. A figure descended a staircase he hadn't noticed, moving with practiced grace. Unlike the faceless escorts, this one's features resolved clearly as he approached, a man perhaps 60 in appearance, though age seemed negotiable in this place. Silver hair pulled back from a face, lined with what looked like genuine experience. Warm brown eyes that held none of the cold assessment he expected. The man wore robes of deep blue rather than the neutral grey of the others, and he carried himself with the comfortable authority of someone who'd held power so long it had become simply part of his posture. He stopped at the perimeter of the central circle, maintaining a respectful distance. A courtesy, perhaps, or contamination protocol. I am the Keeper of Anomalous Arrivals, scholar of the 3rd tier, and your primary liaison during your residency within these walls. I understand the Triumvirate's judgment must be disorienting. Please, allow me to explain what happens now. Residency. Like I checked into a hospital, or an asylum. Maybe that's closer to the truth. Marcus said nothing. Words felt like effort, and he'd spent whatever energy he'd accumulated during the Triumvirate's interrogation. He simply waited, aware of the observers above recording every micro-expression, every shift of weight. The man seemed unsurprised by the silence. He gestured and a chair materialized from the floor itself, stone flowing upward and solidifying into a seat with armrests and a high back. Not conjuration. The floor had simply reshaped itself, as if the room responded to his host's intention rather than his command. "You've been standing for some time. Please sit. We have much to discuss, but there's no urgency. House Astiphir operates on the principle that understanding cannot be rushed." Marcus approached the chair slowly, half expecting it to dissolve when he tried to sit. It held solid beneath him, surprisingly comfortable. The stone felt warm, almost alive, adjusting subtly to support his back. "I've welcomed many souls during my centuries of service, each one unique, each one carrying their own confusion and questions. I've developed something of a specialty in making the transition easier." He clasped his hands behind his back, a professorial stance that probably put most arrivals at ease. The central dominion can be overwhelming. All that grandeur, those ceremonies, the weight of the triumvirate's judgment. Here, we take a different approach. You're not on trial, you're not being punished, you're simply unprecedented. And we have studied the unprecedented for 700 years. We're quite good at it. He has a script, a speech for confused arrivals, gentle words, reassuring tone, the promise that everything will make sense eventually. I wonder how many times he's given this exact performance. "What do you want from me?" Astiphir's smile didn't waver, but something flickered behind his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that Marcus had cut through the preamble so directly. "Want? Nothing so transactional. We wish to understand you, Marcus. Your arrival violates fundamental principles we've held certain for centuries. You carry no purpose, no conviction, no driving force. And yet you exist. You're here. That shouldn't be possible, which makes you the most fascinating puzzle our house has encountered in generations." Marcus leaned back in the chair, feeling the stone shift to accommodate him. Above, the observers leaned forward, tablets glowing brighter, recording, measuring, dissecting him with instruments he couldn't see. "What happens if you can't figure out the puzzle? If I'm just empty? Nothing to understand?" Astiphir's smile faded. For the first time, his expression showed something genuine, concern mixed with curiosity and something darker. Fear, perhaps, of an answer he didn't want to find. Then we will have learned something profound about the nature of arrival itself. Either way, Marcus Vale, you will help us understand what we thought we knew. Whether you wish to or not, you've become important. The question is whether you can become more than an anomaly, whether you can become a person again. Again. As if I was ever a person to begin with. As if there was ever anything inside worth salvaging. The faceless escorts led him through corridors that twisted like intestines, each turn revealing more crystalline panels, more geometric patterns carved into stone. The architecture felt deliberately disorienting, meant to confuse, to make escape routes impossible to memorize. After the fourth identical intersection, Marcus stopped trying to track their path. Let them lead him wherever they intended. He had nowhere else to go anyway. They descended 3 flights of stairs, each level marked by a different colored glow emanating from the walls. Blue at the top, green in the middle, red at the bottom. Some kind of classification system, probably. The air grew cooler with each descent, carrying a faint metallic taste that reminded him of old coins. One escort gestured toward a door indistinguishable from dozens they'd passed. No markings, no number, nothing to indicate this particular cell, no room belonged to him specifically. The door opened at the escort's touch, revealing a space approximately 10 feet square. A bed, carved from the same stone as everything else in this place. A table, a chair, a basin filled with water that glowed faintly blue. One window, narrow and high, showing a slice of courtyard where other robed figures moved with purposeful strides. The room held all the warmth of a morgue drawer. Meals delivered at dawn, midday, and dusk. Do not leave this wing without authorization. Do not attempt to access restricted areas. Observation begins tomorrow at first light. The escorts withdrew before he could respond. Not that he had anything to say. The door sealed behind them with a soft click that somehow felt more final than any lock. So this is exile. Not chains, but walls. Not guards, but rules. They've dressed up imprisonment in academic robes and called it study. At least they're honest about what I am to them, a specimen in a jar. He crossed to the window, peering out at the courtyard below. Scholars moved between buildings, their robes color-coded in ways he didn't understand. Blue, green, red, yellow, each shade presumably indicating rank or specialty. They walked with purpose, carrying tablets and scrolls, engaged in conversations that looked urgent even from this distance. None of them looked up. None of them acknowledged the window where he stood. Either they didn't know he was here, or they'd been instructed not to care. Another specimen, another anomaly to be catalogued and forgotten. The thought should have stung. Instead, it felt familiar, comfortable even. Being invisible was something he'd perfected long before dying. He turned from the window and approached the bed. When he sat, the stone shifted beneath him, not softening exactly, but conforming to his weight in a way that suggested intelligence, or at least sophisticated design. He lay back, staring at the ceiling where more geometric patterns spiraled outward from a central point. Tomorrow they start poking at the void, measuring nothing, trying to understand absence. Good luck with that. I spent 43 years trying to find something inside worth keeping, and all I ever found was more empty space. Sleep should have been impossible. His body, this borrowed flesh that somehow housed his consciousness, didn't feel tired, didn't feel much of anything beyond a dull awareness of existing. But exhaustion came anyway, creeping in like fog. Not physical fatigue, something deeper, the weight of being studied, examined, reduced to data points on crystalline tablets. As consciousness faded, Marcus wondered what they would find when they looked inside him, what readings their instruments would produce when pointed at nothing. Would they see the marriage that ended because he couldn't pretend to care anymore? The job he'd automated himself out of? The apartment where he'd sat for 3 days without moving, staring at walls and wondering why he bothered breathing? Or will they just see void, pure absence, uncontaminated by memory or meaning? Maybe that's all there is. Maybe I really am as empty as the triumvirate claimed. Sleep took him then, pulling him down into darkness that felt no different from waking. In dreams, if he dreamed, there was only the same emptiness, the same hollow certainty that he didn't matter, had never mattered, would never matter. And somewhere in House Astiphir's upper levels, scholars prepared their instruments for tomorrow's examination, eager to measure the impossible, to understand the void. they would fail. Marcus knew this with absolute conviction, because there was nothing to understand, just absence wearing flesh, walking through an afterlife that had no place for him. Morning came without sunrise. No natural light penetrated this deep into House Astiphir's structure. Instead, the walls began to glow, first dim red, then brightening to orange, finally settling on harsh white that made Marcus's eyes water. An artificial dawn, calibrated and controlled like everything else here. The same faceless escorts arrived before he'd fully woken. They stood in the doorway, silent and patient, waiting for him to rise. He did, slowly, joints protesting despite this body's relative youth. Phantom aches from a life that no longer existed. They led him upward this time, past the red level through green, beyond blue into colors he didn't have names for. The air grew warmer, charged with something that made his skin prickle. Magic, probably. Or whatever passed for it in this realm where conviction became power. The examination chamber was smaller than yesterday's observation room, but more densely packed with equipment. Crystalline structures rose from the floor in geometric arrays, each one pulsing with its own rhythm. Cables, or something like cables, connected the structures to tablets held by a dozen robed scholars who stood in a circle around a raised platform at the room's center. "Good morning, Marcus. Please, step onto the platform. We'll begin with basic resonance mapping. It shouldn't cause discomfort." Shouldn't. That word doing a lot of work there. Like, this won't hurt before the dentist drills. He climbed onto the platform without protest. What would be the point? They'd study him whether he cooperated or not. At least this way he could maintain the illusion of agency. The scholars activated their equipment simultaneously. The crystalline structures flared bright, casting shadows that stretched and twisted across the walls. Marcus felt pressure building around him, not physical, but present nonetheless. Like being underwater, weight pressing in from all sides. Initiating baseline scan. Essence resonance should register within normal parameters for a standard arrival. I'm getting nothing. The instruments aren't malfunctioning, but there's no reading. It's like he's not there. The Keeper moved closer to the platform, his tablet held at arm's length as if proximity might yield different results. His expression shifted from professional curiosity to genuine concern. Increase resonance amplitude by 20%. Perhaps the signal is simply weak. The pressure intensified. Marcus felt it now, a squeezing sensation that started at his chest and radiated outward. The crystalline structures blazed brighter, their pulsing synchronized into a single driving rhythm. Around him, scholars leaned forward, tablets raised, desperate for data that refused to appear. Negative resonance detected. The void is inverting our measurements. Cracks spiderwebbed across the nearest crystalline structure, not breaking, transforming. The clear crystal darkened, turning opaque, then black. The change spread like infection, jumping from one structure to the next. Scholars scrambled backward, their tablets flickering and dying in their hands. "Shut it down! Shut everything down now!" But the equipment didn't respond to commands. The crystalline structures continued their transformation, darkness spreading through the chamber like spilled ink. The pressure around Marcus released suddenly, and he staggered, nearly falling from the platform. When he looked up, every piece of equipment in the room had gone dark, dead, corrupted by proximity to whatever he was. They wanted to measure nothing. Congratulations, nothing measured back. 700 years of accumulated research equipment, destroyed in minutes. The keeper stood motionless, staring at his dead tablet. When he finally looked up at Marcus, his expression held something new, not fear exactly, but recognition. The understanding that he'd fundamentally miscalculated what he was dealing with. You're not empty. You're inverse. A negative space where certainty should exist, and certainty cannot coexist with its own absence. Told you there was nothing to study. The chamber's main entrance swung wide, admitting a figure whose presence commanded immediate attention. Robes of deeper blue than Astiphir's, marked with silver thread that formed patterns too complex to follow. The High Assessor had arrived, drawn by the catastrophic failure of their examination. Astiphir, explain this disaster. The keeper turned to face his superior, shoulders slumping in defeat. Around them, scholars gathered their ruined equipment, whispering urgently among themselves. The subject's void nature corrupts resonance-based instrumentation on contact. We cannot study him using conventional methods. We cannot study him at all. Then he cannot remain here. House Astiphir exists to understand anomalies. An anomaly that destroys the tools of understanding serves no purpose. She approached the platform, her gaze fixed on Marcus with clinical assessment. No warmth, no hostility, just evaluation. Marcus Vale, you are hereby remanded to Sector 12 of the Outer Reaches. You will be provided basic provisions and shelter. You will not return to the Central Dominion or any affiliated house territory. This is not punishment. This is quarantine for everyone's protection, including yours. Exile. They're throwing me away because I break their toys. Can't even be a proper specimen. Just corruption in a human shape, sent to rot at the margins. When do I leave? Immediately. Escorts will take you to the transit chamber. From there, you will be conveyed to your assigned sector. There is nothing more to discuss. The faceless escorts materialized at the platform's base. Their neutral touch guided Marcus down, away from the ruined equipment, away from the scholars who watched him leave with relief plain on their faces. He'd been in House Astiphir less than a day, and already they were discarding him, sending him to the wasteland because even academic curiosity had limits. As they led him toward yet another corridor, Marcus glanced back once. Astiphir stood amid the darkened crystals, one hand pressed to his forehead. The High Assessor was already issuing orders, her voice sharp and efficient. Neither looked at him. He'd already been forgotten, reduced to a footnote in their records. The anomaly that couldn't be studied, the void that corrupted certainty. The corridor descended, always descending. Marcus walked toward his exile with the same empty acceptance he'd carried into death. But somewhere in the hollow space where his purpose should have been, a question formed. What becomes of nothing when cast into nowhere? What happens when the void reaches the boundary and finds there's nowhere left to fall? He would find out soon enough. The outer reaches waited, and with them, whatever fate awaited those too broken, even for the afterlife's mercy.